Good morning. What a morning of worship. Great time of worship together. Thank you. I wanted to tell you about a new class that we're starting on Sunday morning at 9, next Sunday. We're calling it, Kyle and I are teaching the class, and it's called Affairs in Order. It's about caring for yourself and others at the end of life. Next Sunday, we begin that in the wilds. It's going to be practical, it's going to be biblical, and I promise you it will not be morbid. Okay? It'd be easy to be morbid. We want to be helpful, and there's going to be some good humor. So I hope that if you need that, if that's something you'd like to think about and to work with us with, we'll be doing that for several weeks, starting next Sunday. Let's just jump into the text, 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Powered beyond our capability is the title of the message this morning. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. I'm going to read the first 7 verses, and then we're going to go back over it. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. So we urged Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. But since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. If you think this message is about giving, you're right, but it's not going to be what you think. I'm going to talk a little about money. That's not really what I want to talk about. I want to talk about how these people in Macedonia did this. How they were able to give beyond their ability. And I'm not talking just about money. I'm talking about how they gave themselves to the Lord. And they did so much more than they thought was possible. And what is the secret of this? What is the secret of this? The Apostle Paul was gathering an offering for the saints in Jerusalem. Apparently, now if you go back to the 1 Corinthians chapter 16, if you look at verse 2 and show that slide, in the first letter that Paul sent them, he said, now on the first day of the week, we're going to gather some money. I want you to gather some money, set it aside, because we got this gift we're going to send to the poor saints in Judea and in Jerusalem specifically. Apparently, now I don't know for sure, but apparently something sidetracked this, because Paul stops in the middle of this wonderful letter he's sending to this second letter to the Corinthians, and he says, oh, about that gift. I want to tell you about some folks I know that have really sacrificed. And I want to tell you how they did it. Instead of scolding them, the Corinthians, for being slow, which is so easy for us preachers to do. I mean, we just want to fix that problem. Paul was so gentle here. Oh, he was so gentle. He even said later he says, I'm not commanding you to do this. I just want to encourage you by what the Macedonian Christians had been doing already. And he tells them about their circumstances. He tells them about the love and the joy and the faithfulness of these Macedonian churches. Let me tell you about some of these Macedonian churches so you'll get a sense of where these folks were coming from. I know we're reading a letter to the Corinthians, But Paul uses the Macedonians as an example. Now, Macedonia is a region that is in what would be today northern Greece. That was the ancient. It's not presently Macedonia today. But back in the first century, Macedonia was just north of Achaia. Achaia was where Corinth was, which is in the southern part of Greece. Macedonia is just north. It's in the province just north. These are Roman provinces. So it would be like saying, I want to tell you, brethren at Southside, about something the brethren in Missouri are doing. Okay? That's quite literally what's being talked about here. We're talking about a neighboring place, maybe less than 200 miles away. And remember, Macedonia is a province that consists of certain cities. Philippi was one. Philippi was a city in Macedonia. He wrote the letter to the Philippians. That is a Macedonian church. Paul had been teaching in what was now known as Turkey or Asia Minor then. And during the night, Paul had a vision while he was on his missionary journey. And that night, a man from Macedonia appeared to him in this dream and said, "Come help us." Paul was so blown away by this vision. The next morning he said, "We got to go to Macedonia." And this call would be the first church plant in Europe. They'd been in Asia. This would be the first church plant in Europe. Paul was being told by God, he took this as from God, and it was, to go to Europe. And the first place they stopped was in Macedonia. It was the Philippians. And one of the sweetest letters that Paul ever wrote was to the Philippians, how they had joined with him in ministry. So this is the Macedonian church, one of the Macedonian churches. It was the first one that Paul planted. And then there was Thessalonica, which was another church. He established the church there. They faced strong opposition to Jewish leaders. He wrote 2 letters to the Thessalonians. Another Macedonian city is the city of Berea. Berea had noble-minded Jews. They examined the Scriptures every day to see that what Paul was saying was true. I'll tell you, these Europeans, these first European children of God, they're not large, powerful places. We know they were under pressure. We know that they were poor. And Paul says, these people exceeded in generosity. Just blows my mind. I want to bring them to you, Corinthians, and to show you that they were able to do stuff beyond their ability. I want to know from this text, and I think it tells us something about how to live beyond our capabilities. I think so often, I know this is true in me, that I only look at what I'm able to do. And I don't look at what God's able to do through me. That I got God in a box, and I like to keep Him there, predictable, to do what I'm able to do. And I'll bet most of us do the same thing. Have you ever considered that God is capable of doing immeasurably more through you than you can ask or imagine? And how is it that this group of Macedonian believers, they were so eager to trust Jesus with their care that they were giving money they really weren't able to give? What's the secret? Well, it's not really a secret. We just need to be reminded. In verses 2 through 4 of the text I read just a moment ago, he uses the most evocative language to describe the attitude of these people. He said they were in the midst of an extreme trial, and that is not an exaggerated translation. Uses the strongest word for awful oppression. They had overflowing joy, it says, and that their poverty welled up in generosity. And that sounds counterintuitive. How do you well up with generosity when the river's dry? Well, they did. They did. Something that is not evident in our English translations that is evident in the original is the word used for overflowing. It's the same root word that's used to describe their generosity. He said, in the midst of their severe trial, they overflowed with joy. And in the midst of their poverty, it says they overflowed with generosity. Like a river out of its banks, the Macedonians overflowed with power, able to do more than they really were able to do. The severe trial was coupled with God's ability to do more than anyone expected, more than maybe they even expected. They had overflowing joy in the midst of all that difficulty, and they begged Paul for the opportunity to help. They begged. Here are these poor believers sharing with poor believers in a way that can only be explained by divine power and the overflowing joy that produced. I want to tell you, here's several points, and then I'm done. The first point is severe trials produce opportunities. They produce power opportunities. A severe trial is an opportunity for God to work in us. To be generous, yes. But to give of ourselves wholly to God, yes. Like no other time at a time of difficulty do we prove our faith in Him. This fellow's name is Nick Vujicic. He's an evangelist and motivational speaker, and no, that is not photoshopped. He has neither arms nor legs. He is a worldwide and well-known speaker and evangelist. He was born with a rare condition that resulted in him having no arms or legs. His parents initially were so distressed they didn't know what to do. They actually were recoiled at the sight of the child. But they grew to love him. He grew to face bullying and struggled with depression and loneliness in his childhood. He persevered. He got a degree in accounting. His mother showed him an article about someone with a disability who had achieved much in life, and it inspired him to expand his vision. He has spoken to millions of people all over the world. You may have seen him on social media platforms, maybe even on TV. 20 years ago, he started an organization called Life Without Limbs. He's a best-selling author, and he is well known. He got married. He wondered in his condition if anybody would ever have him or if he would ever have children. He has 4 children today. And he swims, he golfs, he skydives, he fishes, and he paints. In his book, Unstoppable, Nick said this about his limitations. Having faith, beliefs, and convictions is a great thing, but your life is measured by the actions you take based upon them. You can build a great life around those things you believe and have faith in. I've built mine around my belief that I can inspire and bring hope to people facing challenges in their lives. That belief is rooted in my faith in God. I have faith that He put me on this earth to love, inspire, and encourage others, and especially to help all who are willing to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. God did not make me without arms and legs to punish me. I know that now. I have come to realize that this disability would actually heighten my ability to serve His purpose. Vic Vujicic. Severe trials produce power opportunities. How I have seen the weak and the tested under tremendous pressure who speak a word that has more power than people who are well. God does that. Secondly, we need to trust in God's capability through us. What the Macedonians did was exceed their capabilities by being willing to actually trust God, to do things that required trust in God to care for their physical needs. The trials they suffered were not punishment. They were allowed, these trials empowered them by God. And He enabled them through that trial. I love the story of Jesus going out to feed the thousands. I think all of us have heard the story. And they've been with Him for 3 days. This is all found in Mark chapter 8. They've been in nowhere land. They've been out in the countryside because so many people were following Jesus, they couldn't be in town. So they were out in the countryside. He was teaching, and Jesus was such a powerful teacher that they would not leave. I guess they camped on the grounds. And they were with Him 3 whole days without eating. Or they had eaten all that they brought with them. 3 days. Jesus looks out over the crowd. He probably heard rumbling stomachs everywhere and people beginning to wonder, when are we going to get fed? How are we going to get fed? And so Jesus said, these people have been with me 3 days. What are we going to get them to eat? And of course, you can imagine what the apostles were thinking. And in other Gospels, we're told that they said, well, we've only got so much money. How can we feed this great group? They're just looking at their own capabilities. They're not looking at God's ability. There's God walking with them. And so Jesus says, well, tell me, how many loaves do you have? The apostles, the writer, Mark, doesn't elaborate, but I imagine what the apostles are thinking is, what? You mean we're going to take up a little collection here to see how much we can find in the way of bread to feed thousands of people? How does this happen? How many loaves do you have? He asks them. They found someone with a few loaves. And Jesus proceeds to take those few loaves and feed them all. Beyond our ability is not beyond God's capability. God has the power to work through you. But you need to trust Him. And then you need to do something about that trust. You can't just imagine it. You can't just dream it. You've got to act on it. Let's keep going in the text. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 5, it speaks of the Macedonians, and they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and by the will of God also to us. This message is titled, Living Beyond Our Capabilities. Paul commended these Macedonians for giving beyond their ability. They were poor, under tremendous pressure, but by the unleashed power of the Holy Spirit, they were flooded with joy, and they gave more than they thought possible. And how it happened is they did it through trial. You know, we want to serve God when everything's well, don't we? When the bank account is full, when the kids are healthy and well-behaved, when the job's going well, when we're upwardly mobile and the checking account is full, and the church is behaving like it should, and our friends treat us well, it's certainly easier to serve God when those things are happening. But how do we serve others when things are all fouled up? When the bank account is empty and the kids are breaking our hearts and our sister-in-law hates us? Some of you know some like that. And our children are not faithful and our friends manipulate us. And our world and the world in general seems to be spiraling out of control. The secret is in verse 1, what we just read. Look at that passage again. We want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. It's about God's grace graciously given us. It's the secret. It's God's power is the secret. That's the word here that the word grace means here. It's not just mercy and forgiving power, mercy and forgiveness. It is that which motivates, gives us rocket fuel to do what God would have us do. And overflowing joy. They had overflowing joy in the midst of a very severe trial. How could this be when they were so poor? They had Jesus, and that was enough. I wonder for us if that's true. The Spirit inspired joy, and He still does give joy. And this joy produced the ability to give beyond their ability. The children of God have more reasons to be joyful than any other people on the planet, by far. But some of us are grim and pessimistic. Please don't stay that way. You have been blessed immensely. You have reasons to rejoice. This grace that moved the poor Macedonians to action is the same grace working in you and me. Same grace. Jean-Pierre de Caussade, I hope I got the name right. Show the next slide. It's a book he wrote. He wrote a book called Abandonment to Divine Providence. Caussade wrote of what he calls the sacrament of the present moment. To give ourselves entirely to the present without reservation. To live and give ourselves to this, to now, not to yesterday and not to tomorrow. The sacrament of the present moment. He reasons this way, and I think he is dead on right. He reasons that if we invest too much in our past, we end up being filled with anger and guilt and regret. He said if you focus too much on the future, you will end up with anxiety and fear because you're worried about the what ifs. Past, guilt and regret. Future, what ifs and worry. And Caussade calls us to do what Jesus said to do, to take each day as it comes. Each day has enough evil of its own, Sermon on the Mount, to live in the present now. You want to live joyfully? Live now. Don't live on your failures in the past. Don't live on your concerns for the future. You live now. And know that God is in the now. Now you say, well, I'm worried about the future. God is in your future. Be not afraid. Take this moment. Invest in this moment. The secret to our joy is where God is now. He's right with us and He's inside us. And when we pray, let the future be unknown, but know that God is in it. Looking at 2 Corinthians 8 and 3 and 4, I want you to note they had a powerful initiative. It says they gave as much as they were able, but entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. The Macedonians had a powerful initiative. They desired to help. When I think about us, and I think about you, I think of the soup kitchen. I think of the Grace Room, which incidentally helped 23 families this past Wednesday, 33 individuals. The tornado relief last year, the food cards you buy all the time for our kids, local school kids in need. And I would encourage you, using your own example, to abound more and more in that. Thank you. And I know some of us are giving and trusting God to take care of our needs when we give money for these things. And for the church, of course, and your gifts to Beka. And God sees that. But simply wishing doesn't make these things happen. Waiting for someone else to do it does not make these things happen. It is the strong initiative of people in our church family that have made these things happen, empowered by God's grace. That's why they call it the Grace Room, after all. Couple your initiative with a strong faith in God. Just watch what happens. You will do exceedingly abundantly above what you're able to ask or think. One last thing to find this joy. He said they gave themselves first of all to the Lord and then by the will of God also to us. If you give yourself to the Lord, you have all you need. But if you give yourself to other, that is the way we show that we have all we need. We got all we need, so I can love you freely. I can give freely. I have everything I need. This is more than just assent to a set of propositions. This trust is not just saying, I believe in the Apostles' Creed, all that. This faith is a big push into God's arms and then subsequently into the arms of each other because we have Him together. These folks didn't give because they had to. They took the initiative. They wanted to. They begged to. They asked Paul if they could give, and they were free to love as much as they wanted, and they loved folks they didn't know personally. It's not enough to say that we believe and trust Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord. It's when you take that trust and you turn it into a care for others that magic, power, grace happens in us. It's how Paul's beloved Macedonians could so freely give, so unexpectedly when it was so hard to give, because living faith transforms us, it changes us, it frees us to boldly love others and care for them, to boldly do what we never thought we could. And when we do that, count on God's grace to fuel us to continue to do that. Do we have relationship? Do we have a joyful relationship with Jesus Christ? Have we limited ourselves by imagining only what we can do, and not considered what God can do? A.W. Tozer once said that the widest thing in the universe is not space. He said the widest thing in the universe is the potential capacity of the human heart because we are made in the image of God. It is capable of almost unlimited extension in all directions because we're made in God's image and powered by His grace. One may say today, well, I don't know if I can walk this walk of faith. I thought about it, but I just don't know if I can. I want to, one might say, but you're unsure if you're able. I can assure you, you are unable to do this on your own. Walking with Jesus is not a solo effort you're going to succeed at. He calls you to come and take the Lord. Give yourself to Him first. Then He comes and moves in. And when He moves in, He moves you in the direction of people who share your faith. So you're not alone in this walk. You are powered beyond your capability, what you think you're able to do. So don't let your lack neglect God's ability, His abundance. He is willing and ready to give. And one of the wonderful blessings of giving our lives to Him is realizing that He had already done it for us. He's already given His life for us. As Rod and the rest of us celebrated a moment ago, He died for us. Jesus, His Son. When He could have given anything else, He gave His Son, showing us His extreme love. We can respond to that love this morning. You can respond to that love this morning. And we're inviting you to do that. We're going to stand and sing. Lee's going to lead us in a song. Let's stand together. Let's sing together. If you need anything, come and we'll try to assist you.